It's 11 o'clock. A special meeting. We have, and the audit report that was prepared with Ethan and Mr. Moody. So I think why don't we just start with that? If there's if you guys have anything to open with or a statement or anything. How you want to review us or talk us through the report?
I believe you may have received a copy of this from the chiefs earlier, but a copy of the report, and maybe I can open my computer. Maybe
I think
do we have enough for the media?
Sometimes you can make more.
I'll make more copies. Okay, great, thanks. Ordinarily, briefings and reports from me as the district's lawyer would be an executive session, as you all know.
Right.
And it may be that the board has questions that would be appropriate for executive session. With respect, however, to the progress of Rob Moody's work with this board today, because you directed that this be investigated, and while we are, as I'm about to explain, unfortunately, not done. Some progress is the progress that has been made. We feel we owe it to you to report that to you and to answer your questions. The report is not an attorney-client privilege document. It's an investigative report. Public interest in the subject matter. So for all of those reasons, we determined that should not, or at least this portion should not be, was not appropriate for executive session. As you know, the board directed this, that an audit take place to uncover irregularities and impropriety, if any, and to address concerns which had come to light after Chief Medina and Chief Sanchez arrived here at the district. We will be present, as we expect. The district attorney will also be present to present this report and answer questions and advise the new meeting, which I understand will be on July 11th. Several points bear mentioning as you consider the progress that has been made to date in this forensic audit, which in which Rob has been this last month. First, as we talked about last time, this investigation has been exonerate and to incriminate as the facts come out. Second, all appearances are that at some point, a concerted effort was made to remove or destroy district which are subject to the public records law and which the district had a duty to maintain. Those financial records, as Mr. Moody has pointed out, are nowhere to be found. The chiefs, at my request, scoured every property owned by the district and every space in all of those properties that come within the characterization of anything having to do with money. All those records have been delivered to Mr. Moody's offices. Contrary to claims by some to the contrary, I was assured that passwords to accounts and access to financial information have never been made available to Chiefs Medina and Chief Sanchez. And many of the subpoenas which the district attorney has issued through the grand jury relate to trying to get at the information that has not been forthcoming. Despite diligent searching, there are no records of any kind that Marina and company could rely upon to legitimize the spending discussed in Mr. Moody's initial report. And the final point, which I have asked Rob Moody to elaborate on the significance of, is that despite my written request for audit papers from Paulie Rogers, the district's regular auditor, my requests have been refused. And my understanding is that the district attorney has subpoenaed those records to the grand jury. So the upshot is that the forensic audit work we had hoped would be completed could not be completed and is now partial because we've been unable to locate the records which, by and large, the former staff were obligated to maintain. Moreover, if my understandings are correct, then certain accounts in the district's name remain controlled by Ms. Motherway insofar as the bank is concerned. And unless she were to change that, those records will become available only when produced by the bank in response to a grand jury subpoena. Mr. Moody's here to answer your questions about the initial audit. And the report as it now stands based on the records that are available. On the last page of the report, you will see 6 bullet items, which identify classes of records which perhaps need to be subpoenaed, but nonetheless will facilitate the work that you have asked occur. I spoke with Jeff Auxier yesterday, and he assures me that his office and his chief deputy and the Oregon Department of Justice, Criminal Justice Division are committed to the Oregon State Police ongoing investigation. Jeff has expressed in particular his appreciation for this board's partnership, and he believes that only through this ongoing audit can the district and the state appropriately account for public funds and the district's funds and determine the extent to which public corruption, which appears to have occurred prior to Chief Medina and Chief Sanchez's arrival, in fact, occurred, and the extent to which that public corruption has impacted the district. Jeff Auxier told me that quite a few grand jury subpoenas have been issued. He plans to seek more next week and wanted to make sure that you were aware that Oregon law grants those who receive these records subpoenaed. So there's nothing we could do to make this go any faster than it's going. So by way, I guess finally, we anticipate that unless the direction changes from the board that succeeds the current board in July, the forensic audit will continue, as will the district's partnership with criminal justice authorities to get to the bottom of this. So by way of introduction, I'd ask Rob Moody, who's agreed to be here today, to offer his summary, general observations and highlights, and to answer your questions about the evidence and his findings and perhaps questions about the absence of evidence in certain areas.
Thanks, Aiken. Are there any questions as we get started? Okay.
No, let's go.
Okay, fair enough. There's a lot here. Okay, and I appreciate that. And as we tried to put together our report, well, first of all, by way of introduction, my name's Rob Moody. I'm a partner with Marina and Company. I have we were bantering about this morning. I think I have about 35 years of governmental accounting, auditing, and reporting experience. So this wasn't our first rodeo. I will admit that outside one being Estacada fire a number of years ago, I've never seen anything quite like this. It was continues to be an interesting set of circumstances to work through. So kind of in general comments, internal controls over financial reporting and accounting at the district it'd be an understatement to say they just weren't good. Of opportunity to commit some of the things that we believe happened. There was significant opportunity for those involved or those allegedly involved to have done what we think was done. And that comes from a number of things, starting with not providing sufficient information to the board so that they can perform their stewardship responsibilities. The oversight of the finance director was apparently not there really at all. It appears that there was very little, if any, oversight. Some might ask about the authorization of some of these charges. Well, we found no authorization of the credit card charges at all. And I'll get to more details about the credit cards here in a second, but it's worth noting that the typical controls that were in place over some expenditures where the board got lists of checks with payees, dates, amounts, etc. The credit card statements weren't subject to that. The credit card statements that we did find, there were no indication that anyone ever reviewed or authorized the payment of those. And we found no receipts, no supporting documentation of any of the charges on those credit card statements. So that's the kind of lacking controls that I'm speaking about. Real quick, I'll just kind of run through our approach just for purposes of kind of letting you know what we did. Once engaged, we interviewed some folks. The chiefs were part of several conversations that we had, beginning with a meeting at Aiken's office. Had opportunities to ask questions. The chiefs were very responsive in terms of answering our questions and getting us information. Aiken mentioned all the records were delivered to our offices in Tualatin, where they were maintained in a locked room where I had the only key. Had the opportunity to go through a lot of those boxes, not all of them, but the ones that we thought were relevant. Payroll records, accounts payable records, just general finance boxes, cash receipts, etc. Reviewed a lot of that stuff. The district's contract finance officer, Krista Wolf, has been fabulous in providing analysis and information. She provided us copies of bank reconciliations and basically anything we asked for as well. Taking all of that body of information that we did have, we were able to reach the conclusions that we've formulated for the report. Understanding, again, there's an awful lot that we didn't have. There were payroll records to a point. There were a number of payroll registers that our work papers indicated we didn't have them, couldn't find them. There were quarterly tax reports that were filed with federal tax reports that we couldn't find. Now, we didn't go to, I'll admit, we did not go to the effort to try and get a power of attorney and request those from the IRS, which would have been the next step. But it sort of just continued to paint the picture that we already had in our mind. So let me just go through real quickly here, kind of the main areas of work that we did. I'm gonna start with bank transfers. We got all of the bank statements for the district, save for those two accounts. There were two accounts that were identified through a letter that was received, or a couple of letters that were received by the district indicating a change of address had been filed on a couple of accounts. These accounts were at the address, the physical address of the district, but not in the name of the district. And one of them was specifically in the name of Ms. Motherway. We have not had visibility into those accounts as of yet. My understanding is that they have been subpoenaed, so we hope to get a look at those shortly. But we took transfers from each bank and created a matrix to make sure that any transfer that came out of this bank went into another district bank, or that we could tell where it was going. For example, wire transfers for bond payments. We were able to verify and substantiate those. So we didn't find any issues so far where transfers from one bank didn't go into another district bank. That's a typical, kind of a common fraud element, is if somebody's transferring money out of the district. We didn't find any of that, so that's good news. The next thing that we looked at was the credit cards. So a couple of things, there were some pretty obvious areas of credit card charges that just, I have never seen something like some of these charges where you could stretch to find a business purpose for the charges. Again, without any documentation, it's impossible for me to make that conclusion definitively. There could have been some authorization by someone to do something that is just, I wouldn't think of necessarily, but we've talked about, or you've seen the reports about the charges at the hair salons, etc. There were a number of travel related charges that seemed, in my professional opinion, to be excessive. One of the things that we tried to do in our work was, if there was charges for air travel, we tried to line those up with other credit card charges related to lodging and food that you would expect in a normal business travel situation. We were only able to do that in a couple of circumstances. The rest of them were just air travel, which seems odd if there's a true business purpose for the travel. There was one situation that we talked about in our report where there were, over the course of not very long, a couple of weeks maybe, there were several trips to Las Vegas where each indicated to have only been a one-night stay. Again, no indication of any business purpose and no documentation to show us why. We took a look at all of the credit cards issued by the district and who they were issued to and how many were issued to those individuals. And we noted several cards issued to several different individuals. Not really drawing any conclusions on that, because it could be that somebody lost a card or there were fraudulent charges externally against a card, so you would cancel that card, go to another card. That stuff happens, but there were a lot of credit cards issued by the district. We typically don't see that many cards issued to upper level personnel. And your own policy, fiscal policy 23.9, that's, we quoted it in the report. The chief can issue cards on the basis of accountability and, the requirements for documentation.
But you don't have it, you didn't find anything in your stuff that clearly showed why all these other people were getting the cards?
No, sir.
There's no chief, there's no mention made, for
No,
example,
sir.
nothing, just
No,
the
sir.
cards.
No, sir. We don't know if the chief was involved in the issuance of these cards or not.
That was my. that
Yeah,
was-
there's no way of knowing that at this point.
And just to point out something, we only have stuff that looks like nothing older than 2016.
That's correct.
Okay, so there could very well be more older.
Yeah, that was the point at which it appeared these cards were issued and they opened, these credit card accounts.
Okay.
That was the earliest statements we had.
Okay, but you don't have the opening statement. You just have the earliest statement is in 2016.
I believe that to be correct, yes.
Okay. I'm just trying to determine if there's stuff in 2015 we don't know about yet because of document retention policy
Understood.
for the bank. That's what I'm trying to get to. Okay.
One thing that is interesting, on page 6 of the report, we listed the amounts charged by each of the individuals that had cards during the period that we looked at. And, 2 individuals had charges in excess of $200,000 for the period of time. That's a lot. I mean, I don't mean to be flip about it. It is just, that's a lot of money for a district this size.
The time period is
6 years,
6 years.
2016 through 2022. It's interesting that chart on the net, right below there in the middle of page 6. I'm sorry. Oh, I thought somebody asked a question. That charts the activity by the 3 individuals that had the highest charges on an upward trend until such time as Chief Medina and Chief Sanchez arrived. And there was some visibility into the credit card activity, and you see that it dropped off to nearly nothing.
So once the chiefs arrived, everything dropped.
That's correct.
Okay. That's okay, great. And dropped by a lot.
Yeah, the individual, if you look, the total went from about $150,000 in 2021 to less than $20,000 in 2022.
So that tells me probably what it tells you. That's somebody knew there was a new sheriff in town. Okay.
Again, the next few pages highlight some of the details around the travel that I spoke of. The charges for meals. There was an individual that had a significant amount of charges for meals. Again, it's impossible to tell if those were valid, appropriate charges or not, given the lack of documentation. There were charges to Amazon that we have no detail of. We don't know what they were for. So that paints a picture.
Committee,
Yes, sir.
as far as relative to the Amazon charges. Just my knowledge is somewhat limited, but I do know that you can go on and you can see what's been ordered in the past of your personal, which I assume that obviously Amazon creates that. So is there any, was there any effort, or is there any effort really worth, or would it be worthwhile to find out what was charged? I mean, I can see, I know from Amazon that you would never think of.
Sure. No,
But
my wife knows that.
But could you contact, can you contact Amazon for detail on those charges?
I'm not prepared to answer that.
Okay.
I don't know. I would expect that information has to exist somewhere, but it wasn't part of our current scope.
Sure.
The information is being pursued by subpoena.
Thank you.
Good.
The accounts, to the best of my understanding, the accounts are individual employee accounts. Where the purchase, not a district account, but
Okay.
so, but I'm not absolutely certain. In any event, more will be revealed when Amazon returns the information that's being sought by subpoena.
Thank you. So then we move into the payroll area. And are there any other questions about the credit cards before I move on? Okay. So the first thing we did was try to take payroll information per the payroll registers of the district and reconcile those to payroll tax reports, because typically you've got a body of information, right, related to payroll, salaries, wages, fringes. Do I need to get out of the way if there's a fire truck or something?
Sorry.
So in a normal organization, you would expect all of that information around payroll to be aligned, right?
Right.
You've got one set of salaries and wages that rolls up to benefits and withholdings, and all of that is just a single body of information then that gets reported out for taxes and reported to vendors for withholdings, et cetera. There isn't any real magic to that. So when we started doing comparisons against the information we did have, we found that in certain cases, which is the federal quarterly tax reports, than we had in the payroll registers. You can ask, why would that be? It would be pure conjecture at this point to try and guess. We were able to reconcile some costs back and forth because and normally it goes the other way. You've got higher amounts reported in the payroll register, some of which is tax exempt. Then that feeds into the 9041s. We were able to do those reconciliations, but there were these other amounts that were higher. There were amounts that showed up in these, what support there was, which was minimal for the 941s, that simply didn't show up anywhere in the payroll register. One example is, and I'll get to it here in a little bit, was some longevity pay that was paid out in December of 2019, I believe. It was a separate payroll, looked like it was December 15th. I didn't have a payroll register for it. So we have no way of knowing what the basis was for that longevity pay, but it also just, we never had payroll records to indicate it. You can see in the detail, and I won't read the report to you, but there's several instances where there were reconciling items. The paragraph at the bottom of page 9 is relevant because, again, anytime there is a variance in payroll records, in my professional opinion, it's a cause for concern. There are cases in the past where people have, masked payroll costs by charging them to other accounts of the district where it's unlikely that someone would maybe go look. A case of Estacada a few years ago, the individual involved paid herself and then charged it out again across utility accounts because it was consistent, and nobody ever compared the invoice from the utility company to what was actually recorded. That's just an example. I'm not saying that happened here. Okay, I want to be clear about that. The next step was to take those payroll costs and try and reconcile those to the general ledger, then the district's actual accounting records. And again, we had our challenges doing that. We found things in the general ledger, like this longevity pay, that was not in the payroll registers. That's how we discovered it. So then that takes us to the PERS issue. And this is, I want to try and be very clear about this because this is a confusing area. Okay. all you do, sometimes you just say PERS and people's eyes glass over, right? But I'll try and make this as straightforward as I can. PERS has two plans. Okay. There is what they call PERS, which is tier 1, tier 2 members. And that is anyone who was active in PERS or enrolled prior to August of 2003. Since that time, there's another plan called OPSERP, Oregon Public Retirement System, something. Okay, I could probably be a little bit more distinct about that, but I can't remember what it stands for. But OPSERP is a lower benefit plan than the tier 1, tier 2. Okay. So you got the two plans. The PERS plan, tier 1, 2, tier 1 or tier 2, has a single employer contribution rate associated with it for any given year. They set rates biennially, but it doesn't matter. And the reason I mention that is it does not matter your classification, whether you're general or police and fire, if you're in the PERS plan, tier 1, tier 2. I say it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for purposes of the contribution rate. So the district will pay one rate for those people. The benefits that accrue to those people are very different depending on whether you're general service or police and fire. I'm not prepared to speak to all of those PERS benefits because I'm just not, I can't articulate it well. On the OPSERP side, it does matter what your classification is, whether it's general service or police and fire, for setting of contribution rates. The general service, OPSERP general service rate, employer rate for the district is less than the employer contribution rate for OPSERP police and fire. And I believe there are also benefit differences depending on that classification. So given that structure, let me try and explain what I found. We found a number of people, as listed on page 11. Yeah, we start talking about it on page 10. So I guess I can, use names because it'll probably be easier here. So Mr. Fletcher appears to be properly classified as a tier 1, tier 2 PERS plan member, according to records at PERS. He appears to be misclassified as a police and fire classification because his position as a mechanic does not qualify him for that classification. So what I mean by that is that the district doesn't appear that the district over contributed for him, but his benefits could be misclassified. Okay. Similarly with Dwayne Jordan and Randy Everson, same situation. They're classified as tier 1, tier 2 PERS, but they're also classified as police and fire, which appears to be incorrect. Okay. Now, did have some expense information in the payroll related to Mr. Fletcher. The other two we did not because it was it went back too far. Okay. So then we go to some of the administrative personnel that are listed in that table on page 11. All of these people, none of these, police and fire. So Merritt Nelson, Jennifer Motherway, Susan Sorelli, Misty Holsey were all classified as OPSERP properly, but they were misclassified as police and fire. So their contribution rates were in your payroll system higher than they should have been. Hers lists them as officer, police and fire as well. Monica Cade should have been officer, general service. That's what she shows it PERS. I'm sorry, she may be police and fire. What the district's payroll records show for her is that she's tier 1, tier 2, which is almost double the rate, contribution rate that she should have been.
That's why. And maybe you're the wrong person to ask this and stuff.
I'll tell you if I can't answer.
Monica Cade was the RSVP director.
Okay,
She wasn't an employee, or at least she wasn't supposed to be an employee, or am I mischaracterizing that?
Her position was paid for by a static grant.
so
Okay,
she
yeah.
was an employee. It appears from the payroll records,
Okay,
she was an
okay,
employee of the
fine, so
district.
She had to be an employee to be able to, okay.
So what we determined, and I focused our work on the amount of the contributions and the variances in the contributions. So the amount of the over contribution by the district that we calculated was some $52,000 for the period that we looked at.
And that's just 2019 through 2021.
Yes,
So only in
it's 3 years.
3 years. So in 3 years, this cost us an additional 52,000.
That's correct.
So we're not even looking backwards because these people were here longer than that.
That's correct.
Is that for the 3 employees? or-
That was for the 5 employees
Listed in the report.
that are listed in page 11 there in that table.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Rob, were you able to get to the point of this, determining what the increased unwarranted benefit looks like at retirement due to
No.
this misclassification?
No.
Or the number, the cost to the district that would be the result of actuarial determinations of the unfunded liability that occurs when retirement accounts in tier 1, tier 2 are funded upon retirement.
So
The district would have to pay that money. at that
That's
point,
correct.
right?
So I can speak to that in general terms, but
Yeah,
not
yeah,
in
thanks.
terms of specifics. So if you step back and think, okay, what drives rates at PERS? It's actuarial estimates of future benefits and market activity, right? So can't do much about market activity. It's gonna do what it's gonna do. But the actuarially accrued benefits, if they are based on incorrect classifications, that artificially drives up rates, not just for the fire district, but everybody in PERS. Especially those that are in the state and local government risk pool of which you belong. So an argument could be made that a small city somewhere else in Oregon is having their rates pushed up by virtue of the impacts on the rate pool of having to pay artificially high rates due to a misclassification, whether that's fraudulent or from an error. So the impacts will be timeless, perhaps, on rates because, you know, I don't remember the last time PERS rates went down.
So, but in your experience, I mean, the PERS system is pretty straightforward. And in terms of
Well,
understanding, in
Yeah,
terms of, from the employer's
from
perspective,
the employer's perspective, it
saying-
is.
where to go.
Mhm,
It's, the classification is pretty straightforward. And
that's
that,
correct. It's a
when you-
drop-down box, but whoever has access to the PERS system
Mhm.
as the contact at the district is the one that goes in, and there's a drop-down box for whether they're tier 1, tier 2, or they're OPSERP. And if they're OPSERP, I'm sorry, on either of those, then they're classified as either general service or police and fire.
okay, but a determination of whether somebody is police, fire or not is also very simple.
Yes,
I mean, it's, when I read it, I mean, it's a no-brainer.
That's correct.
If you fight the fire, you get it. If you
that's,
don't fight the fire, you
correct.
don't get it.
it's basically that simple, yes.
Okay, so, but it's, but I'm interested in something you just said. You said that there's a drop-down box. So, and I'm assuming payments are made quarterly, monthly, yearly? When are PERS done once a year?
PERS monthly.
Monthly. So every month, somebody has to,
Or they can go in and change.
because if the administrator does it,
That's correct.
they could do that
Yes,
in the
sir.
middle of the day.
Yes,
They
sir.
could do it middle of the night. They could make that change. And there isn't any real oversight.
Yes, sir. That's
Okay.
correct.
But, and that, when I mean oversight, I mean from the PERS organization themselves.
That's our understanding, is that they do not oversee, audit, or otherwise take responsibility for those classifications.
And
Is
so,
that fair?
That's my understanding.
okay, that's what I understood too. And so, but from an organizational perspective, this organization, that box checking is done by somebody in their office and can easily, hey, you can easily tell the chief, I'm doing this when they do that.
Correct.
And they can also change it later as long as it's that person. So, okay, strikes me as that it's pretty darn easy to put somebody in the, intentionally put somebody in the wrong category. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. It's a no-brainer on where everybody goes, but it sounds like it's very simple.
There's a clear opportunity.
Okay.
A different, to the other aspect of your question around the complexity of the determination.
Right.
With respect to police officers in a police department, a law enforcement agency, and firefighters in a fire department, in contrast with all the other employees that work in those two agencies, it's not particularly complicated.
Right.
You're either licensed and certified Department of Public Safety Standards and Training as a police officer or as a firefighter, or you're not.
Right.
And the benefit tracks that way. Now, with respect to a host of other people, corrections officers and military service,
Deputy district attorneys.
and
maybe.
now deputy attorneys and a few, but not the elected district attorney for some reason. With respect to some of the other nuances.
Right.
There's a statutory definition to apply,
Right.
but it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard with a straight face to argue that a mechanic is a firefighter or a payroll clerk is a firefighter.
Or a finance director.
Yeah, or a police records clerk is a police officer.
But also, a fire chief can't flaunt the rules of PERS and decide on their own that somebody should be in a specific
correct.
category. They don't have that authority.
Well, they have the ability,
Well, sorry,
maybe
right.
not the authority.
They don't have the authority, but they can do it. Right, okay.
When you think in terms of a private tax qualified retirement plan, an employer has an obligation not to discriminate and to apply and follow the terms of the tax qualified plan. The plan is the contract. The benefit is a contractual benefit that's described in the plan. With PERS, I don't think it's any different. It's just that the plan document is the PERS statute, which is applied, and the PERS statute has the definitions you're asking about. Sorry, Rob.
No, thank you. So kind of the last piece that I wanted to mention on that is that understand that Ms. Motherway her funds from PERS and is no longer listed by PERS as an active member. And what we understand, Ms. Nelson has attempted or has initiated steps to do the same. So I guess next is that longevity pay thing that I mentioned. It's our understanding that the district has no basis for paying longevity pay. There's nothing in the contract that indicates anybody is eligible for longevity pay, and there's nothing in the handbook that we could find that even mentioned longevity pay. So we're unaware of any basis for those payments.
So I can fill in a little bit of information in that over 20 years ago, there was some longevity. It was discontinued also over 20 years ago.
Okay.
But that's,
No, it wasn't.
doesn't have a lot of relevancy.
Yeah, this was December 5th, the longevity pay was December 15th of 2019. Workers' comp renewals was another area that was brought to our attention. We attempted to tie the payroll records to the amounts that were reported to the workers' comp carrier. We were unable to do so. There was an amount, a delta of about $1 million less that was reported to the workers' comp carrier in terms of total payroll than what the district's records showed. We have, again, there was no supporting documentation for how they came up with those numbers that were reported to the workers' comp carrier.
Because isn't your rates dependent upon how much you tell them?
It is a percentage of your payroll.
Okay, so by underreporting the amount that you tell, is it safe to say?
I think it was safe.
Okay, so if you underreport the amount of money you pay to your employees, then you get a lower rate.
Basically, yeah, you've saved the whatever that $1 million times your rate is.
That's not.
And the rates are different depending on the classification of employee.
Right.
So my guess is there will be further conversations about that going forward with SAFE. They will probably want their money at some point.
Do we know how long you just did 21?
Yeah, again, that was the only period of time for which I had a full set of records to work with.
Okay. So it could be many times, years and so forth.
It could be. I can't speak to that. And then finally, cash receipts and revenue. We took a look at, again, we just didn't have tons and tons of records to work with. So one of the things that we were concerned about, though, there was a risk of what we call skimming, of where monies could come into the district and never be recorded. So for example, a check comes into the district from an insurance company. And again, I'm making this up for purposes of an example. A check could come into the district. Someone could just take that check and endorse it, cash it, or deposit it in another account and never record it to the district's books. So what we came across a file that had 1099s issued by all the various insurance companies, which are representation of the total amounts paid to the district for that given year. We were only able to reconcile the amount on the 1099 to cash receipts records for 2 of those insurance companies. Now, I didn't try and do it for 100% of the population of insurance companies. Some of them were several $100,000, right? So we took a sampling and just tried to come up with it, and we were unable to do so. The amounts on the 1099s in all but of the ones we tested, in all but a couple of them were higher than what we showed in the cash receipts records.
So in regards to, if I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
and so you're speaking the old way of EMS billing, this kind of is what you were talking about, cash receipts.
This was actual cash receipts into the district. Because we looked at the actual cash receipts, deposits records as recorded.
So this is from 2019, it looks like.
Yes.
Okay. How many? Because this is a little bit scary. So we're talking, how many insurance carriers do we probably have
Dozens.
dozens.
Yeah, dozens.
And so, okay, and you, in 1 year, we can't, because they should match up perfectly. All of our receipts should be matching perfectly to the 1099s, right? There shouldn't be any discrepancy.
Unless there were timing differences right at the end of the year or something, but.
Right, perfectly explained,
Correct.
right, but. Okay. That's, wow.
So then, I mean, that brings us to the conclusions part of the report that I've kind of stated throughout our conversation here this morning. Are there any other questions? Again, I guess I want to emphasize just a couple of things. The internal controls provided the lack of internal controls at the district provided an opportunity for these things to happen. There's something that's often referred to as the fraud triangle. It's like the fire triangle. I always tie it to the fire. I'm a former volunteer firefighter, so I always tie it to the fire triangle. If you take away heat or you take away fuel, the fire goes out, right? If you take away one side of the fraud triangle, your risk of fraud is significantly reduced. So the 3 sides of the
I have a
fraud.
question.
She's a board member.
That's Ken.
That's Ken.
Okay,
Go ahead.
please.
So you are stating, and I want to make sure I get this right because I happen to be doing this as you're speaking at where I work. So the 1099s are not matching up what the insurance companies are stating that they gave us. Why was that not caught when our denials should have gone through the roof? We should have had mismanagement, or we should have been catching that at an EMS level for accounts not paid. They should have been turned into collections. Can we look into this a little bit more?
I don't have the ability to answer that question.
Go ahead.
Like me to comment on that, sir?
Okay, cool.
I can tell you this, is that, during my tenure, we outsourced our EMS billing to System Designs West. And part of that motivation, was, to increase transparency and accountability that I felt was lacking when I had first gotten here. So as it is now, it is clearly reported and controlled. But,
Well, I understand that, but I mean, as far as 2 or 3 years ago, before we went to this system, because I was all for this system, if you remember, that we should have had some kind of, they have to reconcile. These are now insurance things that could have been billed twice, which means that those insurance companies, there's a good chance they're going to come after you guys for the money. I mean, my
Yes,
tenure is up today. I mean, at midnight, this is not my problem anymore, but I'm telling you right now, if we were double billing insurance companies, they're going to come after you for that money. And as soon as they get word of this, they're going to start asking questions.
yeah, yes, ma'am. Well, like I said before, some of that information was not, a lot of the information was not being given to the board. And when I first got here and requested that, everything was done to not provide it to me.
So, well, I'm just going to forewarn you now, you don't want to lose your CMS contract. So you might want to see what else you can find on that.
Thanks, Kim.
So going back to the fraud triangle real quickly, the 3 sides of the fraud triangle are motivation, rationalization, and opportunity. So motivation and rationalization, you really can't do anything about as an organization because they're in somebody's head. And I can't even begin to speak to what might have been the motivation or rationalization of the people that are allegedly involved in this. But the opportunity was clearly there through the lack of internal controls. That's really all I have in terms of prepared comments.
I just had a couple questions for you. I mean,
Yes, sir.
I remember that thing in Estacada, only because long story, but I had a project there and actually, had run into that person. And so I followed it since then, you know, she stole a lot of money. But in this case, well, the Estacada case was one individual,
Correct.
doing their thing. This is far different than that. This
It
has got
appears to be,
a lot
yes.
of people doing similar things. It's almost as if they're all talking to each other and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing, you do it too. Have you seen that before in
No,
these kinds of things? So this is not a common, it's not, so, because what I'm getting here is that it looks like a lot of people were taking advantage of it. And almost like telling, hey, join us. I mean,
I
I'm for
don't
it.
know.
I don't know what to say. I mean, I
Yeah.
can't, usually when I've read about this fraud stuff, it's one person doing this.
You know, with respect to the credit cards,
Right.
you give somebody a credit card and they become aware that nobody's looking. It's pretty, and if it looks like everybody else is doing it, it's pretty hard to, I don't pretend to understand it. I'm not wired that way, but I can understand how somebody could justify it in their mind. If nobody's looking and everybody else is taking advantage, why shouldn't I? And that becomes that rationalization piece.
We have two questions.
Yes, sir.
Is it unusual that the organization that performed your audits on a forever basis, forever annually, when issues of potential malfeasance came up, that they would not turn over the records? That just I find that very interesting. Let's put it that way. Have you experienced it before? I don't want to put you in a bind.
No.
I understand that I could. I know you don't want to say anything about anybody in particular, but
Sure.
just in general and stuff, don't the auditing companies, I mean, they kind of have duty to the organization, not to the.
So I can speak, I am a CPA. I can speak to what our requirements are under professional standards, and that is that our working papers are our property as a CPA firm.
Okay.
There is typically an understanding and a willingness to share that information with the client. I guess I can understand a potential nervousness maybe about sharing it when an attorney asks for those records. That doesn't surprise me. When a subpoena comes, I'm guessing that probably amped up some people. And maybe to go to the first part of your question, I would have an expectation that the board should have been made aware of some of these situations through the normal course of an audit. I've not been able to see those audit work papers yet. At such time as those are provided, we'll have a better handle on whether or not the audits met professional standards, in my opinion. It's my understanding that the district was not issued management letters or letters notifying you of significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in internal control. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct, and that.
Given what we saw in terms of just the credit card charges, lack of authorization, lack of documented authorization or approvals, lack of supporting documentation. If I were the audit partner on an engagement, those would be material weaknesses in internal control and would be reported in writing to the board. That's a pretty serious internal control breakdown in my experience. Again, I won't speak to the philosophies or policies or procedures of another CPA firm, but in terms of professional standards, there is a requirement to report those things in writing. I hope I answered your question, sir.
Yes, then the second question would be putting the best possible face on this whole issue. It could be summarized on the best end, that it would be colossally gross incompetence, maybe. And at the other end,
And I think we stated
we
that in
know
our
what the-
report, yeah.
So I'm curious, you made several comments about not getting everything and there's timeframes still, the subpoenas haven't produced documents. How much more time? I mean, it seems like while we have a lot of information, we don't have really enough to make some determination that are incredibly significant. Are we talking, you need another 3 months, 4 months? Do you have any idea on timeframes?
That would be difficult. There are pieces of it, for example, to go through the audit work papers would take, 10, 12 days maybe depending on what the records look like. It could take hours, it could take days, depending on what's there. To get the additional bank statement information for those two accounts, that wouldn't take a terribly long time to just see what's there. Additional payroll records. I'd love to be able to give you an estimation. I don't want to give you a number that I can't deliver on.
Maybe another way to put it is there's absolutely no reason to stop at this point.
I would agree with that. I'm not the guy that gets to make that decision.
Understand?
And I'm not trying to sell you something that, that I don't, I'm not trying to sell you anything.
Right, I get it. That part, it's very clear. I'm just trying to understand sort of a broader sense.
There's a lot left to know.
Right, that's a great way to put it, yeah, so, okay.
I do want to, again, thank all of you and your team and Aiken and everybody for being as responsive and supportive of our work as you have been.
I really appreciate you guys doing the effort. It's what was needed, so it's terrible, but it's what's needed, so. Okay. You guys have any questions, more questions?
Do we have an idea of who's been questioned? Sent subpoenas to give us information?
I don't.
I'm just curious of who we've interviewed and
and,
talked
and
with.
and are we diving into something that might be best discussed in executive session?
Well, I can answer that question pretty easily. The district attorney and the state police are relying on the forensic audit that the district,
Okay.
but they're controlling the subpoenas and the information flow and the discussions, whatever discussions the state police are having in the course of their investigation. Now, we're not playing any part in any of that, nor do we have any information beyond documents which the state police have a way to securely upload to Rob Moody's accounting firm for him to be able to review.
So that information is vital to continue to conclude our work will be shared when it can be from the state police to us.
Well, yeah, because the determination that Jeff Auxier made early on was the nature of the financial records that the chiefs were able to bring to him was so inconclusive, and the extent of the records in existence plus the record gaps was so amorphous that, well, speaking for myself as looking at this just as a cop would look at it, based on back in the day when I was being a cop, there's no way anybody other than, a CPA, FBI agent kind of investigator or financial fraud expert, which generally don't exist in state and local law enforcement agencies can make sense out of this. Maybe the Oregon Department of Justice, but, public corruption is the number 2 priority for the FBI and the US Department of Justice. And to the state police's credit and to Jeff Auxer's credit, they were willing to take this on locally, principally because this board, from a financial, public trust, public accountability, stewardship of resources, and board responsibility perspective, was willing to direct and fund the audit to get to the bottom of this as a board, and you guys made that decision. So it is, in Jeff Auxer's terminology, a rather unique, in his words, public-private partnership. It's a public-public partnership, really, where if you weren't doing this and you hadn't asked Mr. Moody to do this on your behalf, to share it with the state, then the criminal side of this and the state's investigation would be proceeding on a very different basis. So hopefully it'll continue on this basis. That's the DA's expectation. As I mentioned by way of introduction, we'll all be answering to a new board come July 11th. And we'll be here to inform them and bring them up to speed and brief them and advise them then.
So the members of the audience, are they just the press?
Yes,
All press?
and then, of course, everything is on, the internet, yeah.
Broadcasted.
Yeah, we broadcasted the whole meeting. So it was been, yeah, the purpose being, we didn't want any, this isn't a private meeting, this is a very public meeting for that purpose. So, is there anything else for Mr. Moody mistaken?
I guess I've got a question.
Okay.
Since this is my last board meeting.
Right.
I would like to stay informed because, all this stuff happened on my watch. Is there a way I can be involved in executive session, or is it just up to the board?
And then, I'm sure you'll see it in the papers. But yeah, it's up to the board for them to, or not.
I thought that, but I thought, I'll ask.
May I?
Sure.
One of the things, Mark, that I want to say is that I thank you for, and Kim, and Gary, and Hans, 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago, when I came to you and said, there are things here that don't look right. Okay. Especially Hans pushed me and said, I want you to look under the hood and we need to know everything. I mean, by the time I went to a district attorney, that was when we pulled the trigger, but, we've been having executive sessions all along. And I understand what you say about it happening on your guys' watch, but again, I'm gonna tell you, and I'm gonna tell you, and I stand firmly on this, because I've seen it firsthand. Okay, there is no way you guys could have known, because it was all being kept from you. There's no way you could have known. There was no transparency, there was no authentication process. There's no way this board could have known. No way Hans could have known, no way you could have known, Mark, no way Kim could have known. It was all kept from you purposefully. I thank you for supporting me during this journey that we've taken. It's been a very difficult one.
Thank you, gentlemen. And lady, thank you very much.
Yes, and Kim, thank you. Yes.
Okay, I think we have a couple more items since we have a quorum. I think there was a couple other business items.
Yeah.
Let's see, do we have paperwork on that or not?
We have it. Okay, thanks. Yeah. We have a resolution. We we had a recommendation from our IT department, well, from our IT consultants about, doing some, things to enhance security and, connectivity and communications. And this is just to pay the company, for the services that were already rendered for that. And we're gonna get the resolution is right here.
This was,
Yeah.
this was something because we met on Tuesday.
Yeah, that was, I neglected and left that one out. The responsibility is mine on that. We just had a lot of things going on and I left that out of my file. I apologize to this board and take responsibility for not showing it to you then.
And this is a district-wide change to the server, is that what I?
Yeah, well, it's a servers, we had to bring in, fiber networking and, some of the things for like our connectivity and that we had to do.
Security.
Yeah, security, card access, things like that that didn't exist here before. The IT consultants that we have highly suggested that we do so, so we did.
As a form of control of who has access to take.
Yeah, that was, yeah. We got a lot of, concerns by authorities. One of the statements that was made by a high level authority was that he didn't believe that we had security here in this administration. He felt that, there was outside access that was not only unauthorized, but, shouldn't be happening. So this was part of that to help. We purged a lot of people's, and some people had accesses that shouldn't be held at a very low level, that are administrative only. We've been fixing that and purging that, but that's also been by direction.
A motion.
Just look at the paper.
So this 28,000 is in addition to what was done here at
It
admin
was an add-on, yes.
and budgeted.
Yes,
Do
sir.
we have,
Yes, I had $100,000 in the IT account.
did Renaissance Holdings do the initial fixes?
They did most of the initial construction, yes.
Not the computer.
Not the electrical or computers or the connectivity. No, they didn't do that. They did. That whatever company did all the connectivity and things such.
Renaissance Holdings?
No, not
No.
Renaissance Holdings, the company that invoiced us. They're the ones that did all the connectivity and security and,
Oh, Electro-Wire.
yes, sir.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you.
Make a motion to accept, or to go forth with fiscal year 22-23-2044 electro wire services rendered for the amount of $28,100.
Okay, so a second,
Second?
any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, all opposed? Anybody to oppose it? Okay, because I think Kelly's, still no record of Kelly. Okay.
No, sir.
Okay. All right, motion carries 4-0. Is there anything else?
There was that letter,
There's the letter.
could be just,
Right, right.
I don't know if we need
Do we have a copy of that letter?
I can happily print. Second.
You just want it to be on the record or?
Right, we do want it, Okay, here, guess why don't we'll wait for that, as we go through the awkward pause that this signage does allow in municipal meetings, so. So just for the folks, we're just waiting, we're just, something's. She printed it out, or?
Yeah, she's doing that right now, sir.
Thanks again for both you guys' efforts in this. Really do appreciate the, I know it's been a lot of work, certainly in the last month, and
I have one more question.
Sure.
We took like, I don't know, like 40 boxes, I think, to you.
Oh, yeah.
What are we supposed to do with it now? I mean, did we get it back? I mean, what do you want us to do?
I'd be happy to get them out of our office.
Is it,
I don't know.
Well, some of those records you haven't had a chance
Right.
to get into yet.
oh, okay.
And
I guess
until
Decide if this goes forward or
Yeah,
not.
until Jeff Auxier makes some decision about what to do, where this is going. If
We can
they're,
hold on to it.
if you're not holding on to them, then I want the DA to be able to
Right.
control. what they go.
Yeah, no, we'll hold on to them until otherwise directed.
Yes, sir.
Just want this entered into the record.
okay, yeah, I think we just wanted to say, this is what we talked about last
There wasn't anything in it.
Begin with.
Yeah.
Monday, it was pulled all over the place.
a month ago.
Oh, so I wasn't there, so.
So this is part of the board packet.
Yes, it was posted on the website.
Yeah, I think we just want to make mention that, this is a letter just sort of from this board. Really to the, primarily, I think we call it to the community. It sort of provides, a little more context to what we think we've done over the last year. There's been quite a bit of rancor, quite a bit of yelling and screaming by a lot of people. And, you know, obviously this meeting today has been, a demonstration, I think, of where we've been, I think, on the right path all along and doing what the chief and his staff have done a hell of a job here. And I think we've left this organization within a good place. We haven't changed any millage rates. We haven't gone any levies. We've managed this problem, managed this issue. And it's very important. And I think I said at the budget meeting too, that oftentimes these boards, they don't manage the problem. They just fund it. They never fix what needs to get fixed. And this letter, just really just to our, sort of encapsulate our position and our thinking on it. You guys have any comments on it?
No, I'll miss you guys. That's my comment.
The one thing I want to mention is I'm very disappointed that the incoming new board members were not here for the budget committee.
Right.
They have to live with that budget, but they weren't here to talk about it. Same thing here. They've got this that's gonna pile into their lap. And they're not here to even find out what's going on. That's very disappointing to me. But it's not my
Well, let's
problem.
hope they're here.
Mark,
Hopefully.
Yeah,
Mark. Rick
Yes.
is actually online.
okay, good, good.
Let's hope they're listening. That's the best we can do. Okay, then I think, if there's nothing else for today, then I think we're done. I do appreciate everyone's time and efforts. So with that, we'll adjourn the meeting at 12:20.